Dire Straits. So I'll talk to you a little bit about just FAMSAC generally in our history, and then maybe what the last year has looked like for us, because it's been a pretty dramatic shift. The FAMSAC Food Cupboard was founded in 1969 by a group of ladies who go to a bunch of churches in Western Nepean. So the C in FAMSAC stands for churches, the Family Services Association of Churches. I'm not really sure if they ever had other services beyond being a food cupboard. That's all I've ever known it as, but that's where the name FAMSAC comes from. And so it started off with ladies who wanted to have Christmas hampers to deliver to people in need within their neighborhood. And they did that for a number of years, and then gradually it grew into an emergency food program where they were providing food hampers outside of the Christmas season as well. And today, it's an operation that provides assistance to about 80 families a month in Western Nepean. So we're based in Bell's Corners, but serve Bell's Corners, a sliver of Bayshore, but it's an area that has a lot of need, and that sliver is about half of our clientele, in fact. We also serve Trent Village, Arlington Woods, Craig Henry, those sorts of areas as well. So provide food to 80 families a month, and we also provide about 200 Christmas hampers to families each year. So that's a fairly large program that we do. So 80 families a month, yeah, 80 families a month. Yeah, the fact sheet's got all. So emergency food program is quite an operation. It involves us gathering all kinds of food donations from various locations. We have bins in a few local grocery stores that volunteers have to go and collect items from. We sort through all of that stuff, we sort it, it has to be packed into orders for individual families. We need money to be able to buy perishable items that we add to those, so things like meat or margarine or orange juice or that sort of stuff that we'll add on. And then we have other volunteers who deliver these food orders to people when they phone in and request assistance. We have volunteers who man our phone lines to do all this. So there's probably all told, I would say, somewhere between 50 and 60 volunteers helping us out on a regular basis to feed these 80 families every month. And we've been operating since our founding, essentially, out of the basement of St. Martin de Porres Church in Bell's Corners. I don't know if, how familiar you are with that strip of Bell's Corners, but there's a little segment of Old Richmond Road that used to be at the corner of Richmond and Richmond before they renamed everything. But that little strip has three churches. There's Christ Church Anglican, there's St. Martin de Porres Catholic, and Bell's Corners United Church, all in that little segment. So those three churches, plus Knox United, were sort of founding supporting members, and Arlington Woods Methodist supports us now as well. So we operated, even though we're supported by a number of these different churches, and a lot of our funding and volunteers came from those. We've always operated out of the basement of St. Martin de Porres Church. They provided free space to us there, and actually had two cupboards, one where all of the donations came in, and we sort of sorted through them and stored them, and then another cupboard where we would pack items and have food orders ready to go, and freezers where we kept our perishable stuff. So what turned our world upside down a little bit last March was that the area where we received all of our donations and stored everything was flooded. There was a pipe that cracked, and during a thaw, water started pouring into that area. And so we very quickly had to get all of our stuff out of that space. And there was a large event actually happening at the church the next day or the day after, within a couple of days anyway. So we couldn't even store it in the main hall of the church. It had to go somewhere very, very quickly. And we were fortunate enough to have a whole host of volunteers turn out and help us out to move into a strip mall just down the street. And it happened that there was a tattoo parlor that used to operate in this space in a local strip mall that had just vacated. And the owner of the mall hadn't done anything to that space yet. So this old tattoo parlor, with all of the equipment torn out of it and everything, but the space was still there. I think the mirrors were even still on the walls. But the owner of the strip mall very kindly agreed to let us use that space temporarily. And we thought we might be there a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. So he agreed to let us stay there rent-free while things got sorted out at the church. So that was wonderful for us. once we got there, we discovered we were going to be stuck there a bit longer because they discovered there was mold inside the walls in the insulation of the church storage area where we had been. And so there needed to be some work, some environmental work to decontaminate all of this mold. And then they got into a fight with their insurance company over who was going to pay for the replacement of this pipe that had cracked. And then there were fights with the city because the pipe actually ran all the way out to the street. And all of this took several months to resolve. And so our agreement with the strip mall owner was for 2 months, and we ended up needing to stay there much longer. He was kind enough to allow us to stay, and thanks to some generous folks, including a discount that we received from the owner, we got a reduced rate of rent, but we still had to pay rent for the first time in our existence. And even at that reduced rate, the cost of rent and hydro and the tax that you have to pay on rent, which I didn't realize one did, but commercial rent you pay tax on, that cost was essentially equivalent to our annual budget. So just paying rent, tax, and utilities for a year represented more, probably about 10 to 20% more than we'd actually raised the year before. So our entire operating budget would have to go to paying this rent, even at a very reduced rate. And so, in front of that realization, and not sure how long we were stuck there, we started to turn our mind to fundraising and how we'd be able to afford to keep this space that we desperately needed to be able to store all of the donations that people were giving us. Because if we didn't have a space to receive those donations and to sort them, we wouldn't be able to serve our clients. So we put out a call to everyone that we could think of, essentially. We went around to the sponsoring churches and asked them if they could pony up a little bit more than they usually did, and they responded very kindly to us. We put out a call to service clubs like this one, and a number of them very kindly responded, as you did. And again, I thank you for it. You essentially gave us a month's worth of rent, and then some. We put out a call as well to the community, and so we started to get a few more individual donations. And one of the scenes that warmed my heart tremendously was when we put out that first call for volunteers, the day that we moved everything over. There was somebody, we used a community Facebook page. Any of you who are in Bell's Corners, there's a Bell's Corners Facebook page. We put out a call there, and somebody in Bell's Corners responded to that call, but he talked to us afterwards and said that a few years ago he had some problems with substance abuse and had fallen on hard times, and he used FAMSAC and required our services. He had four children that needed to be fed, and while he was going through his troubles he couldn't afford to. But he was so pleased that he was able to help out when we needed his help. He had a very large truck, and so he was one of the people who helped us move all of these things. We needed to get a large bin to be able to collect more food at a grocery store, and he was one of the guys who helped us move it there. And one morning, he came and slipped into my hand 3 $20 bills and said, "I don't have a whole lot of money still, 4 kids, as you can imagine, it's tough for him. But he said, I know you guys need money to pay for your rent, and you helped me, so now I want to help you." Which is a wonderful thing to see, that people in the community who we've served want to give back and recognize the importance of what we did. Another big thing that we did last summer was we held a big event at Christchurch Bell's Corners called the West End Food Truck Rally. And this was an idea of my wife's, actually. I don't know how familiar you are with the food truck craze that's going on in Ottawa. The City of Ottawa 3 or 4 years ago gave out licenses to a number of new food trucks. So you see these like chip carts everywhere. They gave out licenses to fancier ones. So now you have like Asian cuisine, and you have a fish food truck, and you have, so there's a whole host of these different trucks that have popped up around the city. And there's a fundraising event that went on downtown. It was a food truck rally. You essentially got a bunch of these trucks together in a parking lot, and people paid to come and visit the event, and then once they're into the location, they could sample food from all of these different trucks. So we thought about, let's bring this event into Bell's Corners. And so we brought 10 food trucks into the parking lot at Christchurch Bell's Corners one August day last summer, and the trucks all agreed to give us a percentage of their proceeds for the day, which means we didn't have to charge people to come. Instead, we asked people to bring food donations, and we had a bin out for cash donations. And that one afternoon, we managed to raise $6,000, which is 2.5 months' rent. And we got probably 6,000 to 7,000 food items. We stopped counting at one point. I thought we'd be able to count how much we got, and then I thought we'd be able to count how many boxes we got, and then when that was going too quickly, I thought we'd be able to count how many bins we filled. We have these large sort of metal bins that people were dumping food in. But we discovered we were emptying the bin pretty much continuously at one point. There were about 3,500 people who showed up that afternoon. So lots of food, lots of cash raised, and a wonderful community event again. People brought together families with children walking around. So it was a great event for the community. It was a great way for us to get ourselves known in the community as well. So a lot of people who maybe hadn't heard of FAMSAC before, weren't familiar with us, came to know who we were. So through these sorts of fundraising activities, we've also discovered ways of doing more outreach. We've started using social media, which we've never done before. So we have a Twitter account and a Facebook page that we're promoting events on, promoting local businesses who support us, and thanking people who make donations and doing campaigns on. So we're doing a lot more outreach. We also created partnerships with a lot of local businesses, hosting events at a local brewery, for example. We did a silent auction at Christmas time where we were raising money with items that were donated by local businesses. We had an Indian restaurant in Bell's Corners that donated a portion of their buffet. So if you went on Wednesday night or whatever it was, whatever their slogan was, they said anyone who shows up on this night will donate $3 of the cost of your buffet toward FAMSAC, and raised $800 doing that one month. So all sorts of local businesses who discovered that we existed through this sort of catastrophe that fell on us. We've developed all kinds of new partnerships and all sorts of people who've discovered all sorts of people who are interested in helping us, which we found to be really, really quite heartening. And that network has also been, for us, a source of new volunteers, potentially. So people who didn't necessarily go to any of the churches where we usually got our volunteers from have expressed an interest in helping out in other ways. The challenge that we're finding is, so we're operating out of this tattoo parlor where we're storing and sorting things, and we're still operating the other part of our thing through the basement of the church. Remember, we had 2 spaces, so the second of the 2 spaces is still there in the basement of the church. And that's where we deliver our food from, that's where we pack the food orders, that's where the perishable items go. We only have access to that space when the church is open, which is 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. on weekdays. On weekends, there are services going on at the church. On weeknights, there are AA meetings, or Scouts meetings, or CWL meetings, or other things that go on in the basement of the church. So we don't have a whole lot of access to that space. And one of the things that we're struggling with now is if we were to return to that space, we kind of lose some of the advantages that we've had. So even though it's been very expensive for us to pay for rent, we can access that tattoo parlor anytime we want. We can have 20 or 30 keys that we give to volunteers so that they can come and drop things off when they need to, which we don't have at the church. We can accept volunteers on evenings. We can do things on weekends there, which we're not able to do at the church. So one of the things that we've been exploring is, can we fundraise sustainably over a long period of time in such a way that we'd be able to afford to pay rent on a space, but a space that we control, and rethink how we operate as a result of it. Be able to open ourselves out to a whole other category of volunteers, which we don't have right now. Essentially, the volunteers that we have are people who are retired and at home during the day. I can't do a lot of the work that FAMSAC does because I work full-time downtown. So if we have a space of our own that we're running our entire operation out of, then we can open ourselves out to new volunteers. We can have clients come and pick up food orders at that space, which we're not able to do at the church. And that's understandable why the church wouldn't necessarily want to have 80 people showing up every month and have the secretary dealing with those people coming and going, and have them show up maybe during a funeral or during other things that are going on. But it means for those people, if they're able to come and pick up their food orders, and I recognize there are some who are disabled or some who have difficulty where we'd still have to deliver, but those who do come, they'd be able to shop for the food, as opposed to taking a pre-packaged order, which has what we think people want or what has what we need in it. But we send that out, when we pack it, we don't know who it's going to. So we don't know if they're allergic to peanut butter. There's peanut butter in there. We don't know if it's going to be a Muslim family and we put flakes of ham in there. We don't know those sorts of things. So if people were able to come, they could pick the things that they need, or the things that they like, or that they know their children like. The other thing that we'd love to be able to do in a space that we'd control is to be able to offer more fresh food. The space that we have now, we have a couple of freezers where we store bread items and margarine and frozen orange juice and that sort of stuff. But we don't have any space to put fridges where we could store produce or eggs or milk or that sort of thing. And we'll often have in the summertime people coming and offering to donate fresh produce to us, but it's hard for us to conserve if you don't have a fridge. So again, we have our own space, we can buy fridges for that space and have fresher and healthier and better food. Because we realize a lot of the people who we're serving are people who may have health challenges, or if they're struggling financially, aren't able to buy good quality fresh food. I'm sure you've noticed yourselves in the grocery stores, buying a head of cauliflower is ridiculously expensive. Buying a box of Kraft Dinner is not. And so we'd love to be able to offer people cauliflower instead of Kraft Dinner. But we can only do that if we have the room for it. And we can also try and do more partnerships with the community. So there are a whole host of community garden type projects that are growing all over the place throughout the city. And the city is doing more of them for the sesquicentennial next year. We'd love to have a community garden in our location where people could come and donate that produce to us and we could give it out to our clients. So it's, again, building links within the community, but also providing fresher and better food to the people that we serve. So there's a whole host of possibilities that would open up to us if we're able to afford a space. And that's been the other challenge for us, is figuring out, can we afford it? This year we had a really good story. We were faced with a catastrophe, and actually, I can't believe I didn't realize it sooner. The priest at one of the churches that supports us said, you have to call this the Noah Project. You had a flood and you're rebuilding. I can't believe this never occurred to me. The branding would have been fantastic. But so we had this terrible thing happen, but it's opened up a whole new world of possibilities to us. That year it was really easy to fundraise because we had this terrible story. In 7 years' time, we're not going to be able to dine out on that flood anymore. So what we're trying to put in place now is a more sustainable funding model to see if we can afford to if we can raise enough money to be able to afford to pay for space before we make a commitment on a lease and refurbishing and buying fridges and buying all sorts of other things. So in the past year, we've had a lot of generous donations from businesses and groups. We've had some big fundraising events that have turned out for us well. We did a campaign at Christmas time with something novel that we borrowed from the Kanata food cupboard, which was the idea of sponsoring a Christmas hamper. We figured there's about $100 worth of food in a Christmas hamper. It doesn't cost us $100 to put that food in, but we encourage people to sponsor hampers at a cost of $100. And a number of individuals did, and a number of businesses did as well. Some businesses were very generous with us, and we managed to raise $17,000 doing that. $17,000 is 6 months, right? So if we're able to do those sorts of things sustainably, we're starting to put more energy into fundraising from businesses, from individuals as well, and trying to get sustainable. So people who will agree to give us money, not just one time, but become a monthly donor or become an annual donor. If we can build that kind of a base, then we can afford a space of our own. And we're still hunting to find what that ideal space might be. It's probably not in a strip mall, paying a commercial lease rate. It's probably in a warehouse somewhere, which there isn't a whole lot of in Bell's Corners. But if we're able to find the right location at the right price, and we have a good funding model, then we can really transform some of these dreams that have sort of been born this past year and see about making them move on. So I think I've probably gone on for long enough, and would love to answer some questions if you have.
Jared, maybe it might be ignorance, but why do you not pair up with the Kanata food cover?
So geographically, there's a whole host of different agencies throughout town who each have their own territory. The thing with the Kanata Food Cupboard is they do have a warehouse, but their warehouse is out in Kanata. So for us to go back and forth to that warehouse to serve people who are in Craig Henry.
You're in the Bell's Corners?
We're in Bell's Corners, which is kind of central to our territory. So we could, and that was one of the things we thought about. Is
but that's the main difference, is that,
so we're entirely volunteer based. So instead of asking volunteers to go to a church in Bell's Corners and deliver to Bayshore, we'd be asking a volunteer from Bell's Corners to go to Kanata and get food and bring it to Bayshore.
Then the other question is, would the St. Martin de Porres church basement not be sufficient for the whole operation? No.
Well, we could go back to, once that space is repaired, and it's pretty close to repaired now.
Yeah.
We could go back into it, we think, but we can't be anything more than what we were if we go back. That's part of the challenge, is we don't have access to that space. We can't bring in fridges. We can't have clients come there.
Okay, so you can't roll.
We can't have volunteers working evenings or weekends. We can't, so there's...
Okay. There's
yeah, but we could. It would be free. And we may yet, if we find that we're not able to afford to do anything else, but we're almost hoping we can seize the opportunity to become something different. Yeah.
In terms of your organizational structure, you were born out of a church group, and I'm not sure, do you have your own corporate entity, your own nonprofit entity?
So this is a challenge that we discovered when we tried to sign a lease. We thought we had found a space beside the tattoo parlor, and then we started to get into negotiations about signing a lease for it. And the owner asked about us being incorporated, which we aren't. So we're a registered charity, so we have an identity with the Canada Revenue Agency.
You are a registered charity?
We are a registered charity, but we're not an incorporated body.
Wow.
And so we can't sign a lease as FAMSAC. We'd have to sign a lease as Jeremy Leblanc.
Don't lose that.
Which I am not going to do. So yeah, we were about to sign a lease for this place, and the guy said, well, you have to sign, if you're not incorporated, I need someone I can sue. So you'll have to sign as you to sue, and that wasn't on. And so we lost that space. So we're in the process now of getting our act together to become an incorporated body so that we can sign a lease someday. But that involves reviewing our constitution, which I think was written in the 1990s and doesn't reflect our structure at all anymore. And thinking about things like annual general meetings that we've never had, and auditing financial statements, which we've never had. I mean, we produce financial returns for the CRA, but not on the level that an incorporation would require us to do. So we're trying to figure out, how we meet the reporting requirements and how we meet what the Act requires of an incorporated body. But that's part of a governance review that we're doing in parallel with all the other things.
That was my first question, because normally you get incorporated and then you become a registered charity. So,
No, they registered us without
You don't have to be incorporated in a charity.
well, we got told different. Anyway, we're the same. But anyway, besides the point. So for that fundraising emergency thing that you did people keep track of the names of all the people who came through, and do you have like a database?
Yeah, so we are keeping track of the people who have given to us, so the businesses and the associations and the service clubs and all of those folks, but also the individuals.
Because that could be an area where I could volunteer my time.
Oh, that would be lovely.
Is managing that information and making most of it.
So that's actually one of the things that my wife is working on right now. She's built a fundraising committee that's doing sort of 2, if not 3 areas. One is focusing on past donors. So we have names and addresses of people who've given us cash in the past. So that's one focus, trying to go back to those people, which we've never done before because we never needed to. We just sort of accepted their money when they gave it to us, and that was great. So reaching out to those people again and trying to convince them to become monthly donors or regular donors. There's another group that's sort of looking at the businesses and trying to convince them to sponsor our events and become regular donors. And then there's a group that's sort of looking at outreach and developing a new donor base. So raising awareness through things like postal drops or postcard campaigns to let people know who might not realize that we're the food cupboard serving their area, directing them to our social media, directing them to our website where they can become donors. So there's a fundraising committee that's working on all of those things. So your expertise could probably be very useful.
The Ottawa Food Bank, is it not a collective that's supported partly by municipal funds and that the local, some of the local facilities can draw on their resources either for product or, and so on? Why would you not be?
Why are we not a part of the Ottawa Food
Why,
Bank?
that's right.
Yeah, so the Ottawa Food Bank, you're right, is an umbrella agency that provides food to all sorts of member agencies throughout the city. We're not a member, Kanata's not a member, and Barhaven are not a member. And somebody told me once that there's a bit of Nepean frustration, or Western city frustration, amalgamation that lives on through that, not wanting to be part of City Ottawa stuff. The big reason for us right now is the conditions we would have to meet if we were part of the Ottawa Food Bank would essentially cripple us. To join the Ottawa Food Bank, you have to allow them to collect food from the grocery stores in your area. So currently we have 4 grocery stores in our territory where people can make donations in big bins by the exit. We probably get 85 to 90% of our food from those bins, outside of like Christmas and Thanksgiving. If we join the Ottawa Food Bank takes those from us. So all of that food leaves our community and goes to their warehouse downtown. And sure, they'll give us back food, but their aim is to not provide more than 50% of any food program they serve. So they'll give us half back, essentially. And we'd have to find the other half from another source that we don't really have right now. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is, I think from a marketing standpoint, it hurts our ability to try and fundraise in our community. The Ottawa Food Bank provides food, they don't provide cash. So I can't pay rent in soup. I need to be able to raise money. And one of the arguments we use with people in the community is, it's all well and good to give money to the Ottawa Food Bank, but if you want to help the people in your community, give money to FAMSAC. If you become part of the Ottawa Food Bank, you lose that argument. And I think a pretty healthy leverage that we have in trying to do fundraising. So it's true that if we were part of the Ottawa Food Bank, we require much less space because we wouldn't be gathering and storing and sorting all sorts of food. So we could potentially pay much less to rent a location and would save a lot of volunteers a lot of hours probably. But what we haven't been able to figure out is how we replace the source of food donations that we would lose and how we replace the cash that we're raising as a distinct entity. So those are the 2 big things that are keeping us from joining right now.
So that's interesting then. So they're taking, you would only get 50% back of what came from the community, yet people are donating in the community for the community.
Exactly.
So is the rest of it going into Ottawa? It's kind of like
It's redistribution.
The haves and have-not.
It's redistribution.
Provinces.
And there's more in the suburbs than the suburbs need, and there's not enough in some downtown ones. And we don't have a problem with redistributing. In fact, we do it already with when we have too much stuff or things that we can't use, we give it to the Caldwell Family Center or to Pinecrest Terrace, so we'll share it with other people. But yeah, there's an element of redistribution, and there's an element just philosophically. It's strange that you take all of this food from Bell's Corners, ship it downtown, and then send it back to Bell's Corners. That seems kind of wasteful.
I had another point that when you were talking, you raised a number of interesting ideas about being able to serve your community better in terms of meeting their specific food requirements. The example you gave was being able to not give ham to a Muslim family.
Right.
If you join the Ottawa Food Bank, you have no control over what comes back to you.
Well, we can order, but like you're ordering canned meat, and if it's tuna, or if it's chicken, or if it's ham, you pretty much get what you
But
need.
that sort of dream of being able to move in that direction, I think would be greatly thwarted if you were to become part of this big umbrella.
Yeah, we become much more
organization.
dependent on it. Unless we can find new sources of food donations somewhere else.
Just ask another question. I understand with the Ottawa Food Bank, I have limited knowledge, but they do keep track of their
They do.
clients, and, you know, in other words, they're not open to be ripped off by people.
Yeah.
So would you have people that would deal with the Ottawa Food Bank and then might deal with you because they know they're dealing with a different
Yeah.
agency and
Um,
double dip, so to speak?
That's not true.
Geographically, that doesn't really happen because the Ottawa Food Bank doesn't have an agency on our territory and will only serve people on our territory. So it's true in a sliver of an area sort of south of the train tracks between Woodruff and Hunt Club, and so there's a little area where there's an overlap with an Ottawa Food Bank, with a program that's supported by the Ottawa Food Bank. So there may be a handful of people in that neighborhood who might be able to double dip. And we serve that area because it's where one of the local churches that supports us is, and so we feel it's important to serve that community. But the Ottawa Food Bank already has a program, so there might be a little bit of double dipping in that narrow area, but by and large, the majority of people we serve wouldn't be served by another food program because they're out of the territory. It's all very geographically based, and so the boundaries prevent us.
And how do your clients come to you? In other words, is there
So
a assessment of a client's needs?
we gather information, but we're not going to ask them for bank statements or anything like that. We pretty much take on faith that if someone's making the request, that they need the
Took
food.
them a lot to get there.
Yeah. Ideally, we'd like to be an emergency food service. We don't want to be providing food to someone every month, 12 months a year for 20 years. And we don't have a ton of clients like that. There are some who are very regular every month, are requesting, but by and large, you'd see people appear for a little while and then disappear, and sometimes they'll reappear again. But we're trying to not have that sort of dependency.
I think one of the advantages of potentially having your own space is I know some food cupboards have moved out into just even basic cooking lessons.
Mhm.
Somebody not understanding how to make a soup,
Yeah.
and you can make it very, very cheaply, and it's very nutritious.
Mhm.
But if you don't have those skills,
Yeah.
we don't teach that stuff anymore in schools.
No, and there's a wonderful program at the Parkdale Food Center, whose coordinator is kind of controversial. She was the one last summer, I think, who said stop giving crap dinner.
Yeah.
And she's been a big advocate for providing healthier food, and that's one of the programs they run out of the
Yeah.
Parkdale Food Center. Is they have programs. People come in and they'll make a soup with the vegetables that are donated and the meat that's donated. Excuse me, and then they'll freeze that, so the people who make it can take some home, and they'll freeze the rest, and they'll hand it out to clients who are coming in. We'd love to be able to do that, and actually there's one of the churches who is about to renovate its kitchens, and that's one of the things they'd like to do when the kitchen's been renovated, is have that kind of program for FAMSAC clients. But it's only something that we can do if we have
Yeah.
space.
That's something they're trying to do at Michelle Heights, the community house,
Mm-hmm.
is they have soup Wednesdays. And part of it is that to get people to understand. how
Or
to
even
make it.
even if it's giving, like we have some of the youth